December 26, 1996. Boulder, Colorado. A 6-year-old girl disappeared from her own home on Christmas night. When she was found 8 hours later, investigators collected DNA evidence that would haunt this case for nearly 3 decades. That DNA has been tested, retested, and analyzed using technology that didn't even exist when this crime occurred. And now, in 2024, new breakthroughs in genetic genealogy might finally answer the question that has tormented investigators, divided experts, and captivated the world for almost 30 years. Who took JonBenét Ramsey's life? This is the story of one of the most scrutinized forensic investigations in American history. A case where microscopic traces of DNA became the most controversial evidence ever collected at a crime scene, where cutting-edge science clashed with traditional detective work, where a single genetic profile held the potential to either solve a mystery or deepen it forever, where every advancement in genetic technology brought new hope and new questions, where the intersection of science, criminal justice, and human tragedy created a case that would define an era of forensic investigation. Before we dive into the intricate world of DNA evidence and genetic genealogy that might finally crack this case, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at True Crime Vault, we unlock the cases that demand answers through scientific investigation and factual analysis. New deep dive investigations every week. And if you're fascinated by how modern forensic science is revolutionizing cold cases, hit that like button and drop a comment with your thoughts on this case. Do you believe DNA will ultimately solve this mystery? Let us know below. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990, in Atlanta, Georgia. She was the second child of JonBenét Ramsey and Patricia Paw Ramsey. Her name was a combination of her father's first and middle names, a detail that reflected the close bond she would share with both her parents. The Ramsey family moved to Boulder, Colorado in 1991 when John's computer services company, Access Graphics, established operations there. By the mid-90s, the company had become remarkably successful, with John serving as president and the business generating over $1 billion in revenue annually. JonBenét was a bright, energetic child who loved performing. She enjoyed singing, dancing, and participating in pageants where her confidence and stage presence captivated audiences. Her mother, Patsy, a former Miss West Virginia, had introduced JonBenét to the pageant world, and the young girl had won several titles including Little Miss Colorado and National Tiny Miss Beauty. She was learning to play piano, loved her family's 2 dogs, and had just celebrated what would be her last Christmas with her parents, John and Patsy, and her brother Burke, who was 9 years old at the time. JonBenét attended High Peaks Elementary School, where she was in 1st grade. Teachers described her as engaged and enthusiastic about learning. She had friends in the neighborhood and participated in activities typical of children her age. The family lived in a large Tudor-style home at 755 15th Street in Boulder, a house with multiple levels, numerous rooms, and a somewhat complex layout. It was an affluent neighborhood, the kind of place where families felt safe, where children played outside, where doors were sometimes left unlocked because crime seemed like something that happened elsewhere. The Ramsey family was well integrated into Boulder's social community. John was respected in business circles. Patsy was active in social and charitable activities. They attended church regularly. They hosted gatherings and were known for their Christmas parties. By all outward appearances, they were living an American success story. A thriving business, a beautiful home, healthy children, and a life filled with opportunities and promise. On December 25, 1996, Christmas Day, the Ramsey family followed their traditional holiday routine. They opened presents at home in the morning. JonBenét received a bike that she was excited about, though the cold Colorado weather meant she'd have to wait until spring to really enjoy riding it. In the afternoon, the family went to the home of Fleet and Priscilla White, close friends who lived nearby. Fleet White was a businessman who John had become friendly with through social and business connections. The families had spent time together previously, and the Whites' home was a comfortable, familiar place. The Christmas gathering at the White home was festive and unremarkable. Multiple families were present. Children played together. Adults socialized. Food was served. It was the kind of holiday gathering that happens in homes across America every Christmas. JonBenét was her usual energetic self, playing with other children, enjoying the festivities. By all accounts, she seemed perfectly normal, happy, engaged with the celebration. The Ramsey family left the White home around 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the evening. They drove the short distance back to their own home. This timing would later become important to investigators trying to establish a timeline. When they arrived home, both children were tired. It had been a long, exciting day. According to John and Patsy's later statements, JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car on the way home. John carried her upstairs to her bedroom. The exact sequence of events after arriving home would become one of the most analyzed and debated aspects of the case. According to the Ramseys' account, JonBenét was put to bed without fully waking up. She was already in comfortable clothes. Patsy stated that she may have helped JonBenét with bathroom activities and getting ready for bed, though JonBenét was mostly asleep through this process. Burke went to his room. John and Patsy made final preparations for an early morning trip planned for the next day. The family was scheduled to fly on a private plane to their vacation home in Charlevoix, Michigan, early on December 26th, and then continue to Disney World in Florida. Patsy stated that she went to bed around 9:30 or 10 o'clock. John said he came to bed shortly thereafter, perhaps around 10 or 10:30. The house grew quiet. It was a typical end to a Christmas day. No one heard anything unusual during the night. No sounds of struggle, no cries for help, no indication that anything was wrong. The house, with its multiple levels and thick walls, stood silent in the cold Colorado night. But something did happen in those dark hours. Something that would transform this family's life, this house, and this case into one of the most analyzed crime scenes in modern history. When the morning of December 26th arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. At approximately 5:45 in the morning, Patsy Ramsey came downstairs. She was preparing for the early morning trip. She descended the spiral staircase from the second floor toward the first floor. Near the bottom of the stairs, she noticed papers on one of the steps. As she got closer, she realized it was a handwritten note. She began reading. Almost immediately, she realized what it claimed to be: a ransom note. The note was extraordinarily long for a kidnapping communication. It spanned 3 pages, written on lined paper from a pad found later in the home. The writer claimed to be part of a small foreign faction and stated they had JonBenét. The note demanded $118,000 in cash, an oddly specific amount that, investigators would learn, was very close to the amount of a bonus John had recently received from Access Graphics. The note gave specific instructions for delivery of the ransom. It warned against contacting police and contained specific threats about what would happen if the instructions weren't followed. The writing style of the note was unusual. It contained movie references, including phrases that seemed to come from films like Dirty Harry and Speed. It referenced John's business specifically. It used language that seemed at times formal and at other times casual. The note was signed SBTC with a symbol, though investigators never definitively determined what these initials represented. Multiple theories emerged, from Saved by the Cross to Subic Bay Training Center, but none were confirmed. Patsy's response was immediate and instinctive. She screamed for John. She ran upstairs to JonBenét's room. The bedroom was empty. JonBenét's bed appeared to have been slept in, but the child was gone. The panic that must have seized Patsy in those moments is almost unimaginable. Your child is missing. There's a ransom note. The note threatens death if you call police, but your child is gone. What do you do? At 5:52 a.m., the Boulder Police Department received a 911 call from the Ramsey residence. The call came from Patsy. Her voice on that recording, which has been played countless times in documentaries and news programs, conveys obvious distress. She reported that her daughter was missing and that a ransom note had been found. The 911 operator tried to keep Patsy on the line, asking questions, trying to get information. But the call was relatively brief. Help was on the way. Officer Rick French was the first to arrive at the Ramsey home, arriving at approximately 5:55 or 6 o'clock, just minutes after the 911 call. He was responding to a reported kidnapping. The circumstances were unusual. Kidnappings typically don't happen in Boulder, and certainly not in this neighborhood. But the ransom note existed, and the child was reportedly missing, so French approached it as a kidnapping case. The initial response to the scene would later become one of the most criticized aspects of the entire investigation. This criticism isn't meant to impugn Officer French or the other early responders, who were making decisions based on the information they had in those first chaotic hours. But the reality is that the scene was treated as a kidnapping. not as a potential homicide that had already occurred. This meant that the crime scene was not immediately secured in the way it would have been if responders had known from the start that they were dealing with a death that occurred inside the home. Officer French walked through the house conducting a preliminary search. He went to the basement and checked several areas, including the room where JonBenét would later be found. According to his later testimony, when he checked that room, a small storage area sometimes called the wine cellar, the door was latched. He opened it, looked in with his flashlight, but the room appeared empty. He didn't enter the room. The lighting was poor and his view was limited. He moved on to check other areas of the house. This moment would haunt French in the investigation. Had he entered that room fully, had he searched it more thoroughly, JonBenét would have been found hours earlier. But hindsight is always clearer than the situation in the moment. He was looking for a kidnapped child who, according to the ransom note scenario, had been taken from the home. The idea that the child might be deceased in a basement storage room didn't align with the kidnapping theory everyone was operating under. Detective Linda Arndt arrived at the Ramsey home around 8 o'clock in the morning. She became the primary detective on scene and would remain there for several crucial hours. By this time, the house had begun to fill with people. Friends of the Ramseys had been called and were arriving to provide support. Fleet and Priscilla White came. John Fernie and his wife came. A victim's advocate was present. The Ramseys' minister was called. All of these people with the best intentions were present in a home that was actually a crime scene, though no one realized it yet. This is one of the aspects of the case that seems so clear in retrospect, but was muddied in the moment. The ransom note suggested the child had been taken from the home. The working theory was kidnapping. People were present to support the family during this crisis. But every person in that house, every surface touched, every movement through the rooms was potentially affecting evidence. The crime scene was being contaminated, not maliciously, but simply through the presence of multiple people who had no reason to think they were in the middle of a homicide scene. As the morning progressed, the situation became increasingly tense. The ransom note had specified that the kidnapper would call between 8 and 10 a.m. to arrange delivery of the ransom money. John Ramsey had contacted his bank and made arrangements to get the $118,000 in cash. The money was brought to the home and was ready. Everyone waited for the phone call that never came. By mid-morning, the lack of contact from any kidnapper was raising serious concerns among investigators. In legitimate kidnapping cases, kidnappers make contact to arrange ransom payment. The silence was ominous. It suggested that either this wasn't a real kidnapping or something had gone terribly wrong. Detective Arndt was concerned about the situation. She felt she needed backup but was having difficulty getting additional investigators to the scene promptly. She would later describe feeling increasingly uneasy about the dynamics in the house and the lack of support she was receiving from the department. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, approximately 7 hours after police had first arrived, Detective Arndt asked Fleet White and John Ramsey to search the house again. This instruction would prove to be the moment everything changed. At approximately 1:05 p.m., John Ramsey and Fleet White went to the basement. They went to the storage room that Officer French had checked hours earlier. John Ramsey opened the door. He saw a white blanket on the floor. He immediately recognized it as a blanket from JonBenét's room. He rushed forward. JonBenét was there, wrapped in the blanket. She had been deceased for some time. In a moment of paternal instinct, John Ramsey picked up his daughter and carried her upstairs before investigators could properly document the scene. Fleet White, who was with John, later described the moment as surreal and horrific. They had been operating under the assumption of a kidnapping all morning. The discovery that JonBenét had been in the house all along, deceased, fundamentally changed everything about the case. Detective Arndt was upstairs when John Ramsey appeared carrying JonBenét's body. The child was clearly deceased. Arndt moved JonBenét to the living room floor. In another complication for the crime scene, a blanket was placed over the child, and Arndt moved JonBenét's hands at one point, actions that, while understandable in the moment, further affected the physical evidence. The scene had been compromised in multiple ways, not through negligence but through the chaos of a situation where everyone had been operating under incorrect assumptions about what had actually happened. The immediate focus shifted from kidnapping investigation to homicide investigation. The Boulder Police Department began treating the scene differently, though by this point, hours had passed with multiple people present in the home. The coroner was called. Additional detectives arrived, the house was sealed, but the damage to the crime scene preservation had already occurred. This would become one of the most debated aspects of the case. How much critical evidence was lost or contaminated in those first hours? What might investigators have discovered if the scene had been secured from the very beginning as a homicide scene rather than a kidnapping? The forensic examination performed later that day by Dr. John Meyer, the Boulder County coroner, revealed critical details about how JonBenét died. The official cause of death was asphyxiation associated with craniocerebral trauma. JonBenét had suffered a significant blow to the head, causing a skull fracture. The blow had been severe enough to cause a fracture approximately 8.5 inches long. This injury would have been immediately incapacitating and likely caused unconsciousness. She had also been strangled with a ligature device. This device had been fashioned from cord, with a wooden stick used to create what's known as a garrote, a mechanism that could be tightened. The presence of this device indicated deliberate construction. It wasn't a simple strangulation. Someone had taken time to create this device. The sequence of injuries became important to investigators. Medical evidence suggested the head injury may have occurred first, possibly rendering JonBenét unconscious, with the strangulation occurring afterward. The examination also revealed evidence that investigators interpreted as possible indications of assault. Due to the sensitive nature of this case involving a minor, specific details of these findings remain in sealed court documents. What can be stated is that this evidence became a significant factor in the investigation and in theories about what occurred that night. JonBenét was found wearing a white shirt and white long underwear that was too large for her. Investigators determined these were not the clothes she had worn to the Whites' Christmas party. At some point during the night, she had been changed into these clothes, or had changed into them herself. This detail raised questions about the timeline and about who might have dressed her. The long underwear would become particularly significant because it was on this garment that the most important DNA evidence was found. The crime scene itself provided numerous pieces of evidence, some pointing in different directions, contributing to the complexity and controversy that would define this case for decades. There was a ransom note written on paper from inside the home, using a pen found in the home. There was no sign of forced entry, though a basement window was found open, and there was discussion about whether this could have been an entry point. A suitcase was positioned beneath this window, possibly used as a step, though this was never confirmed. In JonBenét's bedroom, the bed appeared to have been slept in but not disturbed in a way that suggested struggle. In the basement where she was found, there was a flashlight on a kitchen counter that became a focus of investigation, though its significance was debated. There were various items in the basement that could have been connected to the crime, or could have been ordinary household items with no connection at all. The ransom note became the subject of intense analysis. The Boulder Police Department brought in handwriting experts to compare the note to writing samples from various individuals. Patsy Ramsey provided multiple handwriting samples, as did John and others who were asked. The experts' conclusions were mixed and controversial. Some experts felt they couldn't eliminate Patsy as the possible author of the note. Others felt the handwriting didn't match hers. The FBI's analysis suggested the note was unusual in multiple respects and might have been written to stage a kidnapping rather than being genuine. The note itself contained 376 words, making it one of the longest ransom notes on record. Most ransom notes are brief, providing just the essential information. This note went on at length, including unnecessary details and language. It addressed John by his first name and by his formal name. It referenced his business. It contained threats and instructions, but also seemed oddly personal. The fact that it was written on multiple pages from a notepad in the home, apparently after arriving in the house, suggested the writer had spent significant time there, comfortable enough to sit and write a lengthy note. Investigators found a practice version of the ransom note in the home as well. The first page of what appeared to be an initial attempt at writing the note that was abandoned and a fresh start made. This suggested that whoever wrote the note had even more time in the house than just the time to write the 3-page final version. They had started, stopped, started again. This level of comfort in the home became part of the debate about whether this was an intruder or someone who lived there. And then there was the DNA, the evidence that would become the most debated, most analyzed, most controversial aspect of the entire investigation. When forensic scientists examined JonBenét's clothing, they found DNA evidence from multiple sources, which isn't surprising. Clothing worn by a child who lives in a house with other people, who attends school, who interacts with the world, is going to have DNA on it from various sources through normal contact. But certain DNA evidence stood out as potentially significant. The most important DNA evidence came from the long underwear JonBenét was wearing when she was found. Forensic scientists conducting analysis in early 1997 identified an unknown male DNA profile from samples taken from this garment. This profile was partial, meaning it contained genetic markers from several locations on the DNA strand, but wasn't a complete profile. However, it was distinctive enough to be entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, as an unknown profile. The CODIS system is a database that contains DNA profiles from convicted offenders, unsolved crime scenes, and missing persons. When a new profile is entered, it's automatically compared against all the profiles in the system, looking for matches. If the same DNA profile shows up at multiple crime scenes, this can link those crimes. If a person who is arrested for a crime has DNA in CODIS, matching an unsolved case, this can solve that case. The unknown male DNA from the Ramsey case was entered into CODIS, where it has remained for over 2 decades, checked regularly against new entries without finding a match. The initial DNA testing in 1997 used technology that required relatively larger samples and produced basic genetic profiles. As technology improved through the late 90s and early 2000s, more sophisticated testing became possible. The DNA evidence in the Ramsey case was retested multiple times using newer techniques, each time attempting to extract more information or to develop a more complete profile. The presence of this unknown male DNA immediately became a focal point of debate. Some investigators and experts believed it was the key to solving the crime. Their reasoning was logical. If this DNA belonged to the perpetrator, then identifying the source of that DNA would identify the killer. The DNA was found on the victim's clothing, in locations that suggested direct contact. It didn't match anyone in the family. It didn't match anyone who had legitimate access to the child. Therefore, it must belong to whoever committed the crime. However, other investigators and experts were skeptical about the DNA's significance. They argued that DNA transfer is complex and can occur through various innocent mechanisms. DNA can be present on clothing from the manufacturing process. Workers who handle garments in factories can leave trace amounts of DNA. People who try on clothing in stores can leave DNA. DNA can transfer from one item of clothing to another in a laundry. DNA can transfer through secondary contact, touching an object that someone else touched, then touching something else, transferring DNA without direct contact with the primary source. This debate wasn't academic. It fundamentally shaped how different investigators viewed the case and what theories they pursued. Those who believed the DNA was significant tended to focus on intruder theories, the idea that someone not in the family entered the home and committed the crime. Those who were skeptical of the DNA's significance tended to focus on theories involving people who lived in the home or had regular access to it, arguing that the DNA was coincidental and that other evidence was more important. The Boulder Police Department, in the first years of the investigation, largely focused their attention on the Ramsey family. This focus created intense controversy and would eventually contribute to a split between the police department and the district attorney's office about the direction of the investigation. The police believed that the evidence, particularly the ransom note and the lack of forced entry, pointed to someone in the home. The DA's office, particularly as DNA evidence was analyzed and reanalyzed, became increasingly convinced that the unknown DNA was significant and that an intruder theory was more plausible. This institutional conflict played out publicly over the years, with leaks to media, with public statements that sometimes contradicted each other, and with a general sense that the investigation was being pulled in different directions by different stakeholders. It's impossible to know how this internal conflict affected the investigation's effectiveness, but it certainly didn't help. Cold cases are solved through coordinated, sustained effort by teams working toward the same goal. When the team is divided about what the goal should be, success becomes much more difficult. In 1998, Boulder Police Chief Tom Kobe requested help from the FBI and other outside agencies. The FBI had been involved to some degree from early on, but this was a more formal request for comprehensive assistance. The FBI conducted a review of the evidence and investigation. Their conclusions, leaked to media over time, suggested they believed the evidence pointed towards someone in the home rather than an intruder. This assessment was based on their analysis of the ransom note, the crime scene, and standard criminal behavior patterns. In 1999, a grand jury was convened to hear evidence in the case. Grand juries are investigative bodies that can subpoena witnesses and review evidence to determine if charges should be filed. The Ramsey case grand jury heard from dozens of witnesses over the course of more than a year. They reviewed the physical evidence. They heard from experts on various aspects of the case. The proceedings were secret, as grand jury proceedings typically are, so the public didn't know what was being presented or how the grand jury was responding. In October 1999, then District Attorney Alex Hunter announced that the grand jury had completed its work and that no charges would be filed. Hunter stated that the evidence wasn't sufficient to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. He thanked the grand jury for their service and indicated that the investigation would continue. For years, this was the public understanding of what had occurred. The grand jury had reviewed the evidence and declined to indict anyone. However, in 2013, a surprising revelation emerged. Court documents that had been sealed were released following legal action by journalists. These documents revealed that the grand jury had actually voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey, but not for murder. The indictment charged them with child abuse resulting in death and with accessory to a crime. The theory apparently was that even if the grand jury couldn't determine which parent had been directly responsible, they believed one or both had been involved in causing JonBenét's death and in covering it up. The indictment had never been signed by Alex Hunter. Under Colorado law, the DA has discretion about whether to sign an indictment and move forward with prosecution, even if the grand jury votes to indict. Hunter had declined to sign the indictment, effectively nullifying it. His reasoning, stated publicly after the 2013 revelation, was that he didn't believe the evidence would support a conviction at trial and that prosecutors have an ethical obligation not to pursue charges they don't believe they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The revelation of the grand jury's vote created new waves of controversy. Critics argued that Hunter should have moved forward with prosecution and let a trial jury decide. Supporters argued that he made the ethically correct decision that prosecutors shouldn't bring charges they don't believe in simply because a grand jury voted to indict. The debate illustrated how deeply divided opinion was about this case, and how different people viewing the same evidence reached dramatically different conclusions. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to pursue various leads and suspects beyond the immediate family. In the years following the crime, numerous individuals came under scrutiny. Some were people who had been in the Ramsey home for legitimate reasons, workers who had done repairs or installations, delivery people, friends or acquaintances of the family. Others were individuals with histories of crimes against children, people who lived in Boulder at the time, or people whose behavior after the crime seemed suspicious. Each potential suspect was investigated. Many were asked to provide DNA samples for comparison against the unknown male profile. One by one, these suspects were eliminated. Either their DNA didn't match, or they had alibis for the night of the crime, or investigation revealed they had no plausible connection to the Ramsey family or opportunity to commit the crime. The elimination of suspects, while good investigative work, was also frustrating. Each elimination narrowed the field, but didn't point toward an answer. One individual who received significant attention was a man named Michael Helgoth. Helgoth lived in Boulder, had a criminal record, and owned boots that were allegedly similar to a boot print found in the Ramsey basement. He died by suicide in February 1997, shortly after the Ramsey murder. Some investigators and researchers believed Helgoth should be considered a serious suspect. However, others pointed out that the evidence connecting him to the crime was circumstantial at best. There was no DNA match, no clear connection to the Ramsey family, and no definitive evidence linking him to the crime scene. His death created the impossible situation where he couldn't be conclusively eliminated, but also couldn't be investigated further. Another individual who became a focus of attention was Bill McReynolds, a local man who had played Santa Claus at a Ramsey Christmas party. McReynolds was investigated and eventually cleared, but not before his life and his family's life were significantly disrupted by the scrutiny. He provided DNA samples that didn't match the unknown profile. He had alibis for the night of the crime. But the fact that he had been in the Ramsey home and had interacted with JonBenét made him a person of interest that investigators had to pursue. The reality of high-profile investigations is that many innocent people come under suspicion simply because they had some tangential connection to the victim or the crime. These individuals must provide alibis, submit to questioning, give DNA samples, and have their lives examined, even when investigators ultimately determine they had nothing to do with the crime. It's an unfortunate but necessary part of thorough investigation, and numerous people connected to the Ramsey case experienced this scrutiny. In 2002, the case took what appeared to be a dramatic turn. A man named John Mark Carr, an American schoolteacher living in Thailand, contacted authorities claiming to have information about the JonBenét Ramsey case. Over a period of communication, Carr eventually confessed to killing JonBenét. He provided details about the crime and claimed to have been in love with the child. His confession made international news. He was arrested in Bangkok and extradited to the United States. The arrest created a media frenzy. Here, finally, was someone confessing to the crime, someone who claimed first-hand knowledge of what had happened. But almost immediately, problems emerged with Carr's confession. Some of the details he provided about the crime were wrong. His timeline didn't match evidence from the investigation. And most significantly, when DNA testing was performed comparing Carr's DNA to the unknown male profile from the crime scene, there was no match. Carr was immediately released. The confession was false. The Carr incident illustrated a problem that plagues many high-profile cases: false confessions from individuals seeking attention or struggling with mental health issues. The JonBenét Ramsey case has received hundreds of confessions over the years from people who were not involved. Investigators must take each confession seriously and investigate it, but the vast majority turn out to be false. This consumes investigative resources and creates false hope for resolution, but it's an unavoidable reality of cases that receive massive public attention. Patsy Ramsey died in June 2006 after a long battle with ovarian cancer. She was 49 years old. She died without seeing resolution in her daughter's case, without the answers she had sought for nearly a decade. Her death was significant to the investigation because it removed one of the people who had been under the most suspicion. If investigators who believed in family involvement were correct, Patsy's death meant one potential suspect could never be prosecuted. If investigators who believed in an intruder were correct, Patsy's death was simply a tragedy compounded by years of unjust suspicion. In 2008, 2 years after Patsy's death, a significant development occurred that would shift the trajectory of the investigation and become one of the most controversial moments in the case's history. The Boulder District Attorney's Office, now under Mary Lacy, commissioned new DNA testing using a technique that had recently become available: touch DNA analysis. Touch DNA testing represented a major advance in forensic science. Traditional DNA testing requires visible biological material: blood, saliva, semen. Touch DNA can identify genetic material from skin cells left behind when someone touches an object. It's incredibly sensitive, capable of developing profiles from just a few cells. The technique had been used successfully in other cases, and Lacy believed it might provide new information in the Ramsey case. Forensic scientists used touch DNA techniques to test areas of the clothing that hadn't been previously tested, or that hadn't been tested with this level of sensitivity. They focused particularly on the waistband area of the long underwear JonBenét was wearing. This area would likely have been touched by whoever removed or adjusted the garment. Using touch DNA, analysts developed a partial male DNA profile from this area. The crucial finding was that this profile appeared consistent with the unknown male DNA previously identified from other areas of the clothing. This wasn't a new, different unknown profile. It appeared to be the same unknown male DNA, now found in an additional location. To many investigators and DNA experts, this finding was highly significant. It suggested the DNA wasn't just manufacturing contamination or random transfer from the retail chain. The same profile appearing in multiple locations, including an area that would have been touched while handling the garment, suggested direct contact by a single individual. Based on these findings, District Attorney Mary Lacy took an extraordinary and controversial step. In July 2008, she sent formal letters to John Ramsey, to the estate of Patsy Ramsey, and to Burke Ramsey, officially clearing them as suspects in JonBenét's death. The letter stated that new DNA evidence, combined with other evidence in the case, convinced prosecutors that the Ramsey family was not involved in the crime. Lacey publicly apologized to the family for the years of suspicion they had endured and stated that an intruder was responsible for JonBenét's death. The decision to formally exonerate the Ramsey family was immediately controversial. Some current and former investigators disagreed strongly with Lacey's conclusion. They felt the DNA evidence, while interesting, wasn't conclusive enough to eliminate all other evidence and theories. They argued that touch DNA is particularly subject to transfer and contamination issues, and that finding consistent DNA in multiple locations might not be as significant as Lacey suggested. They felt that publicly exonerating the family closed off investigative avenues that should remain open. Others supported Lacey's decision. They argued that the DNA evidence, particularly with the new touch DNA findings, was strong evidence of an intruder. They felt the family had been unfairly targeted for years despite the lack of conclusive evidence against them, and that the exoneration was appropriate and overdue. They pointed out that 3 separate investigations, the grand jury, the police investigation, and the DNA analysis, had not produced evidence sufficient to charge anyone in the family, and that at some point, the focus needed to shift entirely to finding who the DNA belonged to. The debate over the DNA significance had been ongoing since 1997, but the 2008 exoneration brought it to a head. It forced a fundamental question. Was this DNA the key to solving the case, or was it a red herring that was leading the investigation away from the truth? Different experts, different investigators, and different analysts looking at the same evidence reached opposite conclusions. This isn't unusual in complex cases, but it made the path forward unclear. Dr. Lawrence Kobylinski, a highly respected forensic scientist who has worked on numerous high-profile cases, has stated publicly that he believes the DNA evidence in the Ramsey case is significant and probative. In his expert opinion, the presence of the same unknown profile in multiple locations on clothing worn at the time of death suggests this DNA belongs to someone involved in the crime. He has advocated for continued DNA testing using the most advanced techniques available. However, Dr. Dan Crane, another well-respected DNA expert, has expressed more caution about the touch DNA evidence specifically. Dr. Crane has published research on DNA transfer mechanisms and has pointed out that DNA can move from surface to surface through indirect means. He doesn't dismiss the DNA evidence in the Ramsey case, but he argues it must be interpreted carefully and that investigators shouldn't exclude other theories based solely on this evidence. This scientific debate reflects a broader reality about DNA evidence. It's incredibly powerful, but it requires interpretation. DNA can prove someone was at a location or had contact with an object or person, but it doesn't always tell us when that contact occurred or in what context, or what it means. In the Ramsey case, everyone agrees the unknown male DNA exists. The question is what it means and how much weight it should be given relative to other evidence. After Lacey's exoneration letter, the investigation entered a new phase. If the DNA truly belonged to the perpetrator and that person wasn't in the family or among previously investigated suspects, then who was it? The profile remained in CODIS, checked regularly against new entries as offenders were arrested and convicted around the country. But years passed without a match. This lack of a match suggested that whoever the DNA belonged to, they either had never been arrested for a crime that required DNA collection, or they were deceased, or they were outside the United States in a jurisdiction that didn't share DNA databases with CODIS. The case returned to Boulder Police Department control in 2009 after several years under the DA's office. This returned the investigation to traditional law enforcement structure. Boulder PD formed a small team dedicated to working the case, reviewing all evidence, following up on tips, and considering new approaches. They faced the challenge of working a case that was over a decade old, where the initial crime scene had been compromised, where multiple investigative theories had been pursued, and where public and media attention remained intense. Through the 2010s, the investigation continued quietly. Boulder PD didn't provide regular public updates, which some critics argued made the case seem forgotten, while the department argued was appropriate for an active investigation where revealing too much could compromise the work being done. They worked with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and other agencies. They reviewed tips that continued to come in. They consulted with experts on various aspects of the case. And then, forensic genealogy emerged as a revolutionary new tool in solving cold cases. The technique represented a completely different approach to DNA evidence than traditional CODIS matching. Instead of waiting for a direct match in a criminal database, Forensic genealogy used consumer DNA databases to identify relatives of unknown individuals. The technique works by uploading crime scene DNA to consumer genealogy databases like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. These databases contain genetic information from millions of people who submitted DNA to learn about their ancestry. When crime scene DNA is uploaded, the database algorithms identify people whose DNA shares segments with the crime scene DNA, indicating a family relationship. These might be distant relatives, third cousins or fourth cousins, who share a common ancestor several generations back. Genetic genealogists then use these relationships to build family trees. They start with the identified relatives and work backward through genealogical records to find common ancestors. Then they work forward through the descendants of those ancestors, identifying individuals who match the age, location, and other characteristics of the unknown perpetrator. With enough relatives identified and enough genealogical work, it's possible to narrow down to a specific suspect or even to a single individual. The technique gained international attention in April 2018 when it was used to identify the Golden State Killer. Joseph James DeAngelo had terrorized California in the 70s and 80s, committing murders, sexual assaults, and burglaries. He had evaded capture for over 40 years. Traditional investigation had failed to identify him. His DNA was in CODIS but had never matched anyone in the database. Investigators working with genetic genealogist Barbara Ray Venter uploaded his DNA to GEDmatch. They identified distant relatives. They built family trees stretching back to the 1800s. They identified descendants who fit the profile. And eventually, they identified Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer living quietly in Sacramento. When they obtained his DNA from a discarded item, it matched the crime scene DNA. DeAngelo was arrested and later pleaded guilty to 13 murders. The Golden State Killer case proved that forensic genealogy could solve cases that seemed unsolvable. It demonstrated that even partial DNA profiles and very distant familial relationships could lead to identification. Following this success, forensic genealogy was used to solve case after case. The 1987 double murder of Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg in Washington State was solved when investigators identified William Earl Talbot through genealogy. The 1992 murder of Angie Dodge in Idaho was resolved when genealogy led to Brian Lee Dripps. By the early 2020s, forensic genealogy had been used to solve over 200 cold cases. It had been used for murders, sexual assaults, and even to identify deceased individuals whose identities were unknown. The technique had proven itself as one of the most significant advances in criminal investigation in decades. And naturally, attention turned to whether it could be applied to one of the most famous cold cases in American history, the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. The question of using forensic genealogy in the Ramsey case is more complex than simply uploading DNA to a database. The DNA profile from the Ramsey case is partial and degraded in certain areas. It's not as complete as investigators would prefer for genealogy work. Some portions of the profile are strong, while other portions are weaker or missing. This doesn't mean genealogy is impossible, but it affects the likelihood of success. Additionally, there are legal and ethical considerations. Different genealogy databases have different policies about law enforcement access. GEDmatch, which was used in the Golden State Killer case, has changed its policies multiple times regarding law enforcement use. Some users opt in to allow their data to be used for law enforcement purposes, while others opt out. Family Tree DNA has a different policy. Ancestry.com and 23andMe generally don't allow law enforcement access without warrants or court orders. The legal landscape around forensic genealogy is still evolving. There are questions about privacy rights, about whether people who submit DNA to learn about their ancestry should have it used in criminal investigations, about what level of judicial oversight should be required. Different states are passing different laws regulating the practice. It's a complex area where technology has moved faster than legal frameworks. Despite these challenges, Boulder Police announced in 2021 that they were actively pursuing forensic genealogy approaches in the Ramsey case. They stated they were working with experts in the field and exploring all possibilities for using DNA evidence to solve the case. They didn't provide specific details about what was being done, which is appropriate for an active investigation. But the announcement signaled that the investigation was using cutting-edge techniques and hadn't given up on finding answers. In 2022, the investigation took another step forward. Boulder PD released a statement confirming they were working with a specialized private laboratory that focuses on advanced DNA analysis and forensic genealogy. They didn't name the lab publicly, but sources familiar with the investigation indicated it was one of the premier facilities in the country for this type of work. The lab was attempting to extract maximum genetic information from the evidence and to develop the most complete DNA profile possible for use in genealogy databases. This work is painstaking and time-consuming. Unlike in television shows where DNA results come back in hours, real-world forensic DNA work, especially with old and degraded samples, can take months or years. The samples from the Ramsey case have been tested and retested multiple times over nearly 3 decades. Each testing process potentially degrades the samples further. Modern techniques can work with minimal DNA, but there are limits to what's scientifically possible. The challenge with applying forensic genealogy to the Ramsey case isn't just technical, it's also investigative. Even if genealogy leads to a family tree and potential suspects, those suspects must then be connected to Boulder, Colorado in December 1996. Investigators must establish opportunity and means. They must find corroborating evidence. A DNA connection identified through genealogy is a lead, not a solution. It's the beginning of intensive investigation, not the end. Consider how this might work in practice. Suppose the Ramsey DNA is successfully uploaded to a genealogy database and matches are found, perhaps several third cousins. Genealogists build family trees for these cousins, working backward to identify common ancestors. Perhaps they determine these cousins all descend from a couple who lived in the Midwest in the 1880s. Now the genealogists must work forward through all the descendants of that couple to the present day. This could be hundreds or even thousands of individuals across multiple generations. From this pool, investigators must identify individuals who fit certain criteria: males who were alive in 1996, who were old enough to commit the crime based on other evidence, who had some connection to Boulder or reason to be there, who don't have rock-solid alibis for that night. This winnowing process can take the suspect pool from hundreds down to perhaps a handful of individuals. Then each of those individuals must be investigated: where they lived in 1996, what they were doing, whether there's any connection to the Ramsey family, whether they can be eliminated or emerge as a viable suspect. If a viable suspect is identified, investigators then need to obtain that person's DNA legally for direct comparison to the crime scene sample. This might involve surveillance to collect discarded items containing DNA, or it might involve seeking a warrant for a DNA sample. If the DNA matches, then the full investigation intensifies. Who is this person? What's their background? What's their connection to Boulder, to the Ramsey family? Can witnesses place them near the scene? Is there any other evidence linking them to the crime? This process can take years from the initial genealogy match to potential arrest. The genealogy work alone can take months. The follow-up investigation can take additional months or years. And this assumes the genealogy work produces useful leads. It's possible that the DNA profile won't match anyone in the databases strongly enough to build reliable family trees. It's possible the person's relatives aren't in the databases. It's possible the genealogy leads to individuals who all can be eliminated for various reasons. The success rate of forensic genealogy, while impressive, isn't 100%. Many cases where genealogy is attempted don't result in identification, either because the DNA isn't suitable for the process, or because the person's family tree isn't represented in available databases, or because the investigative work following initial genealogy hits doesn't lead anywhere. But the success rate is high enough that it's worth trying in virtually every cold case with DNA evidence. One of the most interesting aspects of forensic genealogy is that it works backward through time. People who have never been arrested, who have never given DNA samples to law enforcement, who have lived their entire lives unknown to police, can be identified decades later because their third cousin decided to learn about their ancestry and submitted DNA to a consumer database. This represents a fundamental shift in how criminal investigation works. It means that no cold case with DNA evidence is ever truly cold. Every case has the potential to be solved as databases grow and techniques improve. For the Ramsey family, the potential of forensic genealogy represents hope for finally getting answers. John Ramsey, now in his 80s, has been vocal in advocating for the use of these techniques. He has stated publicly that he believes DNA is the key to solving the case and that he wants to see every possible avenue pursued using the most advanced technology available. He has supported the use of genealogy databases and has urged Boulder police to be aggressive in pursuing these approaches. John Ramsey has also been critical at times of what he perceives as investigative failures over the years. He has argued that the initial focus on the family distracted from finding the real perpetrator. He has expressed frustration with what he sees as institutional reluctance to fully embrace the DNA evidence. These criticisms, whether fair or not, reflect the perspective of a father who lost his daughter and who believes that earlier, different investigative choices might have led to a resolution years ago. The case has had profound effects on everyone involved. For the investigators who worked it, the Ramsey case has been a defining professional challenge. Some retired from law enforcement without seeing it solved, carrying the weight of an unresolved case. For the forensic scientists who analyzed the evidence, it has been an opportunity to push the boundaries of their science, but also a reminder of its limitations. For the prosecutors who reviewed the case, it has raised fundamental questions about burden of proof, about when evidence is sufficient to bring charges, about the ethics of prosecution. For the Boulder community, the case changed the sense of safety and security. This was a crime that occurred in a nice neighborhood, in a large home, on Christmas night. If it could happen there, it could happen anywhere. The case received international media attention, bringing unwanted scrutiny to Boulder and to everyone connected to the family. The community grappled with suspicion, with media presence, with the reality that someone in their midst might be responsible for this crime. The media coverage of the case has been extensive and not always accurate or fair. Early coverage often focused on the Ramsey family in ways that assumed guilt. The pageant photos of JonBenét were used repeatedly in news coverage, sometimes in ways that sensationalized rather than informed. Conspiracy theories flourished in tabloid coverage and online forums. The case became a cultural touchstone, referenced in movies and television shows, discussed by millions of people who had no direct knowledge of the evidence or investigation. This media attention created challenges for the investigation. Witnesses and potential witnesses were exposed to extensive coverage that might have affected their memories or perceptions. The pool of potential jurors, should there ever be a trial, has been thoroughly exposed to coverage that might create bias. Investigators had to deal with information leaks and public pressure. The case became as much a public relations challenge as an investigative one. Despite all these challenges, the investigation has continued. Tips have been followed up. Evidence has been preserved and periodically retested as technology advances. Databases have been checked and rechecked. The Boulder Police Department maintains a dedicated effort on the case, even as personnel change and new investigators come in without the baggage of the early years. In 2023, Boulder PD released a statement on the case's 27th anniversary. They stated that the investigation remains active and ongoing. They noted that they continue to receive tips and that they investigate each one. They emphasized their commitment to using every available resource and technology to solve the case. They asked anyone with information, no matter how small it might seem, to come forward, and they reaffirmed that they believe the case can be solved. What does the current state of DNA technology offer that wasn't available even a few years ago? Several significant advances are relevant to the Ramsey case. First, methods for analyzing degraded and minimal DNA samples have improved dramatically. Techniques that can extract genetic information from smaller samples or from samples that are damaged or contaminated have been developed and refined. This means that evidence which might have yielded minimal information 10 years ago might yield more complete profiles today. Second, the genealogy databases have grown exponentially. GEDmatch, one of the databases most used for forensic genealogy, now contains over 2 million profiles. Combined with other databases and resources, genealogists have access to genetic information from millions of individuals. This growth increases the chances that any given DNA sample will find matches in the databases. Even if the perpetrator themselves never submitted DNA, the chances that one or more of their relatives did increases as more people participate in consumer genetic testing. Third, the techniques for building family trees from genetic matches have been refined through experience. The genealogists who work on forensic cases have now solved hundreds of cases. They've developed methodologies for working with partial matches, for dealing with adoptions and unknown parentage. for navigating complex family trees, for using genealogical records efficiently. The field of forensic genealogy is maturing, with best practices emerging and experts gaining experience. Fourth, the legal frameworks around using these techniques are becoming clearer. While there are still debates about privacy and appropriate use, courts have generally upheld the use of forensic genealogy when it's done with appropriate judicial oversight. This creates a clearer path for investigators to pursue these techniques without fear that the results will be inadmissible in court. Fifth, collaboration between different types of experts has improved. Solving a cold case with forensic genealogy requires forensic scientists, genetic genealogists, traditional investigators, prosecutors, and others to work together. These cross-disciplinary collaborations have become more common and more effective as the field has developed. Investigators understand better what genealogists need. Genealogists understand better what investigators need. The communication and coordination have improved. All of these advances mean that a case like JonBenét Ramsey's, with DNA evidence collected in 1996, has better chances of being solved today than ever before. That doesn't guarantee it will be solved, but it means the possibilities are real and worth pursuing aggressively. It means that the DNA, which has sat in databases for decades, might finally lead somewhere. It means that advances happening right now today might be the advances that crack this case. It's also worth noting that DNA isn't the only evidence that benefits from time and technology. The ransom note, which has been analyzed extensively, might be analyzed with new linguistic or behavioral tools. The forensic evidence from the scene might be re-examined with new techniques. Witness memories, which can be unreliable, might be supplemented by records and data that can be more rigorously examined now than in 1996. Cold cases are solved through the cumulative effect of many small advances, not usually through a single dramatic breakthrough. There's a philosophical question embedded in the Ramsey case. When do we give up on solving a crime? At what point does a case become so old, so cold, that continued effort isn't justified? Different people answer this question differently. From a practical resource allocation perspective, departments must balance working cold cases against addressing new crimes. There's always a tension between the past and the present, between the unsolved and the current. But from a justice perspective, there's no statute of limitations on murder. There's no expiration date on a victim's right to justice. JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old when she died. She deserves justice just as much as a victim from last week does. Her case deserves continued effort just as much as any case does. The passage of time doesn't diminish the crime or the obligation to solve it. The reality is that cold cases are being solved decades after the fact with increasing frequency. The 1989 murder of April Tinsley in Indiana was solved in 2018, 29 years later, using forensic genealogy. The 1971 murders of young sisters Catherine and Sheila Lyon in Maryland were solved in 2015, 44 years later, through dogged investigative work. The 1957 kidnapping and murder of Maria Ridolph in Illinois, one of the FBI's oldest cold cases, was solved in 2011, 54 years later. Cases that seemed hopeless have been solved. Families that had given up hope have gotten answers. This means that the Ramsey case at 27 years old is not too old to solve. It's an actively worked case with good evidence, with dedicated investigators, and with advancing technology. Every year that passes brings new tools, new databases, new possibilities. The DNA profile that has been nameless for decades might be identified this year, or next year, or 5 years from now. But the possibility remains real as long as the investigation continues. For John Ramsey, now living in Michigan, the case is personal in ways no one else can fully understand. He lost his daughter in horrific circumstances. He has lived under suspicion for years. He has watched the case become a media spectacle. He has seen his family torn apart by tragedy and by the investigation itself. He is now in his 80s, and he has stated publicly that he wants to see this resolved before he dies. He wants to know who killed JonBenét. He wants justice for his daughter. Burke Ramsey, who was 9 years old at the time of his sister's death, has largely stayed out of public view. He gave a high-profile interview with Dr. Phil in 2016, one of his few public statements about the case. He has sued media outlets for defamation when coverage suggested his involvement. He has tried to build a life separate from the case that dominated his childhood. The tragedy of losing his sister has been compounded by years of public scrutiny and speculation. The broader true crime community remains intensely interested in the case. Online forums discuss theories. Documentaries are produced. Books are written. Everyone has an opinion about what happened and who was responsible. Some of this attention is informed and thoughtful. Much of it is speculative and unhelpful. But the sustained public interest means that the case hasn't been forgotten, which has both positive and negative implications for the investigation. What would resolution of this case look like? The ideal scenario would be DNA evidence, through genealogy or direct match, leading to a specific suspect. Additional investigation would corroborate that suspect's involvement. Perhaps witnesses would place the suspect in Boulder. Perhaps physical evidence would connect the suspect to the scene. Perhaps the suspect, when confronted, would confess. Prosecutors would review all evidence and determine that charges can be filed. An arrest would be made. A trial would occur. A jury would hear all the evidence and reach a verdict. And finally, nearly 3 decades later, there would be an answer to who killed JonBenét Ramsey, and justice would be served. But resolution might not be that clean. It's possible that DNA leads to a suspect who has since died, making prosecution impossible, but still providing answers. It's possible that DNA leads to a suspect who cannot be definitively linked to the crime beyond the DNA, creating a situation where investigators know who did it but can't prove it beyond reasonable doubt. It's possible that the case is solved through evidence other than DNA, with the DNA question remaining unresolved. It's also possible, though no one wants to admit it, that the case might never be fully solved. Despite best efforts, despite advancing technology, despite dedicated investigators, some cases remain unsolved. The reality of criminal investigation is that perfect information is rare. Sometimes the evidence just isn't there. Sometimes the breaks don't come. Sometimes the answer remains forever out of reach. But even if the case isn't solved in a legal sense, with charges and conviction, the continued investigation has value. Every piece of evidence analyzed adds to human knowledge about forensic science. Every technique tried and refined improves future investigations. The Ramsey case has been a crucible for forensic DNA science, pushing the field forward. The debates about how to interpret evidence have made the scientific community think more carefully about methodology and conclusions. The case has trained generations of investigators in how to handle complex, high-profile investigations. The case has also sparked important conversations about child safety, about crime scene procedures, about media ethics, about the presumption of innocence, about how we think about victims and suspects. These conversations have value beyond this single case. They affect how we approach criminal justice more broadly. The Ramsey case, in its tragedy and complexity, has been a teacher, however unwilling a teacher it might be. As we look toward the future, the question isn't whether the case deserves continued effort. It clearly does. The question is whether the continued effort will lead to resolution, and that question can only be answered through the work itself, through the DNA analysis happening in laboratories right now, through the genealogy work being done by experts, through the investigative work following up on tips and leads, through the systematic review of all evidence with fresh eyes and new tools. The DNA evidence collected in 1996 has been a constant through every phase of this investigation. It has been tested and retested with each generation of technology. It has been debated and analyzed by countless experts. It has eliminated suspects and focused suspicion. It has been both the greatest hope for solving the case and the source of the deepest divisions about what the evidence means. And now, in 2024, that same DNA might finally be giving up its secrets through forensic genealogy techniques that didn't exist when it was first collected. Every DNA profile tells a story if we can decode it. The unknown male DNA from the JonBenét Ramsey case has been silent for 27 years. But silence isn't the same as absence of information. The genetic code is there, preserved in databases, present in evidence carefully stored in Boulder. That code contains an identity. It contains a name. It contains the answer to who that DNA belongs to. The challenge has been accessing that information, translating that genetic code into an identity. Forensic genealogy offers a pathway to that translation. By connecting the DNA to family members through shared genetic segments, by building trees that map relationships across generations, by working from the known to the unknown, Genealogists can potentially identify even those who have never been in any criminal database, who have lived their entire lives unknown to law enforcement. This technique has revolutionized cold case investigation precisely because it can reach those who traditional database searching cannot. The investigation continues. Evidence is being analyzed. Databases are being checked. Tips are being followed. Investigators are working the case even as this documentary is being watched. They're not giving up. They're using every tool available. They're pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Because a 6-year-old girl deserves justice. Because her family deserves answers. Because society has an obligation to pursue justice for victims regardless of how much time has passed. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990. She died on December 25th or 26th, 1996. She was 6 years old. She loved to perform, to sing, to dance. She had a bright smile and an energetic personality. She was learning piano. She loved her dogs. She was excited about Christmas. She was looking forward to a family trip. She was a child with a future full of possibilities. And then in one night, all of that was taken from her. She deserved to grow up. She deserved to experience all the moments that should have been hers. School, friends, achievements, challenges, love, disappointments, triumphs, an entire life. She didn't get that. What happened to her on that December night was a tragedy that no child should experience, that no family should endure. The least that can be done now is to pursue justice relentlessly, using every tool science and investigation can provide. The case remains open. The investigation remains active. The hope remains that DNA will provide the answer, that genealogy will identify a name, that investigation will confirm a suspect, that justice will finally be possible. 27 years is a long time to wait, but justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. Every cold case solved after decades demonstrates that time doesn't erase the possibility of resolution. If this case intrigues you and you want to stay updated on developments in this investigation and others like it, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Vault. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any updates on this case when new information emerges. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on whether DNA will ultimately solve this case and what you think about the potential of forensic genealogy in cold case investigations. And remember, these aren't just famous cases or true crime entertainment. These are real people, real lives, and real families still seeking answers almost 3 decades later. JonBenét Ramsey deserves to be remembered not just as a victim in a famous unsolved case, but as a child who lived, who was loved, who had value beyond the tragedy that ended her life. Her case deserves resolution not because it's famous, but because every victim deserves justice. The DNA evidence that has held its secrets for 27 years might finally be ready to reveal the truth. The technology exists. The dedication exists. The will to solve this case exists. What remains to be seen is whether all of these elements will come together to finally answer the question that has haunted this case since that December morning in 1996. Who took JonBenét Ramsey's life? And will DNA finally provide the answer that brings justice for a 6-year-old girl who never got to grow up? Until the next investigation, stay curious, stay informed, and never forget that behind every cold case is a real person whose life mattered and whose case deserves every effort to solve.